Okay, we are on page 60 in your student's book, Lesson B, Time Clauses. Page 60, Lesson B, Time Clauses. So in this lesson, we are going to focus on clauses with until and as soon as. Let's do that again. Until and as soon as. Okay, so in the orange box underneath the title, you can see dependent time clauses with as soon as and until can come at the beginning or end of a sentence. So if you look at the first sentence, you could say, as soon as Mr. Shamash finishes his lunch, Almaz leaves Quiet Palms. But you can also say Almaz leaves Quiet Palms as soon as Mr. Shamash finishes his lunch. So I want to make mention that the time clause is the dependent clause, and the main clause is an independent clause. The independent clause can stand alone. So in this case, the independent clause is Almaz leaves Quiet Palms. That's the independent clause or the main clause. And the time clause, which is also a dependent clause, is as soon as Mr. Shamash finishes his lunch. So dependent time clauses can be in the beginning or at the end of a sentence. It doesn't matter. All right, so I'm going to play an audio of an explanation of this chart with other readers so you can listen to different speakers. Okay, here we go.
Dependent time clauses with as soon as and until can come at the beginning or end of a sentence. As soon as and until can be about the present, the past, or the future. Present. As soon as means right after.
As soon as Mr. Shamash finishes his lunch, Almaz leaves Quiet Plains.
Until means up to a particular time.
Almaz stays with Mr. Shamash until he finishes his lunch.
Past.
As soon as Mr. Shamash finished his lunch, Almaz left Quiet Plains.
Almaz stayed with Mr. Shamash until he finished lunch.
Future.
As soon as Mr. Shamash finishes his lunch, Almaz will leave Quiet Plains.
Almaz will stay with Mr. Shamash until he finishes lunch.
Check your understanding. Look at the picture and the tense. Complete the sentences. Choose the correct time clause and decide on the correct form of the verb in parentheses.
As soon as Mr. Shamash finishes his lunch, Almaz leaves Quiet Plains.
Almaz stays with Mr. Shamash until he finishes lunch.
As soon as Mr. Shamash finished his lunch, Almaz left Quiet Plains.
Almaz stayed with Mr. Shamash until he finished lunch.
As soon as Mr. Shamash finishes his lunch, Almaz will leave Quiet Plains.
Almaz will stay with Mr. Shamash until he finishes lunch.
All right, so now let's look at the practice exercise. Complete the sentences with until or as soon as. Circle the time clause or the dependent clause. So number one, A, Mr. Shamash is in pain. When will he start to feel better? B, he'll feel better as soon as he takes his medication. So in this case, the time clause, you can see this. You can see it circled. It says as soon as he takes his medication. So that means the main clause or the independent clause is he'll feel better. So you can put this, you can put the time clause in the beginning or at the end. In this case, it's at the end. But you can also say, as soon as he takes his medication, he'll feel better. Okay, number 2. Or actually, let me give you some time to go ahead and complete it. Okay, so number 2, how long will Mr. Shamash stay at Quiet Palms? He'll stay until his broken hip heals. So just as a reminder, until means up to a particular time. So he'll stay until his broken hip heals. And the time phrase is until his broken hip heals. So you could also say, until his broken hip heals, he'll stay. Okay, number 3. When can Mr. Shamash begin exercising again? As soon as Mr. Shamash feels stronger, he can start doing moderate exercise. And the time phrase is, as soon as Mr. Shamash feels stronger. Number 4. When does Mr. Shamash get ready for his walk? He gets ready as soon as Almaz arrives. He gets ready as soon as Almaz arrives. And the time phrase is, or time clause is, as soon as Almaz arrives. Number 5. How long will Mr. Shamash and Almaz play cards? They'll play cards until it is time for lunch. And the time phrase is until it is time for lunch. Number 6. How long did Mr. Shamash nap yesterday? He napped until Almaz came to visit him. And the time clause is until Almaz came to visit him. Number 7. When is Mr. Shamash going to go to sleep? As soon as his visitors leave, he'll take his medicine and go to sleep. And the time clause is as soon as his visitors leave. So again, you could put that at the end. You could say, he'll take his medicine and go to sleep as soon as his visitors leave. And then number 8, when did the nurse assistant help Mr. Shamash with his shower? As soon as Mr. Shamash woke up, the nurse assistant helped him with his shower. And the time clause is, as soon as Mr. Shamash woke up. Okay, now let's look at page 61 and discuss Charles' volunteer activities at a nursing home. And then same thing, use as soon as or until. And use the present tense in this case. Okay, so let's take a look at the example. The blue box at the top says, as soon as Charles arrives at work, he puts on his name tag. Okay, and this is actually the same thing as number 1. So you can see 2 phrases, arrive and put on name tag. So you actually need to add some other words. In this case, we have to add put on his name tag. Or you could also say put on a name tag. Let's do that one more time. As soon as Charles arrives at work, he puts on his name tag. Now, if you look at the purple box, or purple speech balloon, you'll see a different way to say this sentence using until. You could say, Charles doesn't put on his name tag until he arrives at work. So it's actually the same meaning, but we're using until instead of as soon as. So Charles doesn't put on his name tag until he arrives at work. So I will give you some time to make sentences with the numbers 2 through 8. As soon as Charles gets his assignment, he goes to Mrs. Halliday's room. Now, of course, as I mentioned, you put the time clause at the end. So you could say, Charles goes to Mrs. Halliday's room as soon as he gets his assignment. Okay? Now, for this one, you can also use until, but we have to use the negative form. So we have to say, Charles doesn't go to Mrs. Halliday's room until he gets his assignment. So until he gets his assignment, Charles doesn't go to Mrs. Halliday's room. Okay, and then number 3, Charles walks with Mrs. Halliday until she feels tired. So for this one, we can use as soon as, but instead of using doesn't, we can use a different word, meaning the opposite of walks. So that would be stops walking. So we could say Charles stops walking with Mrs. Halliday as soon as she feels tired. Okay, number 4. Charles reads to Mrs. Halliday until lunchtime. Okay, number 5. This is actually very similar to number 4. So Charles stops reading as soon as lunch is delivered. Number 6. Charles stays with Mrs. Halliday until she is finished eating, or until she finishes eating. Okay, number 7. Charles watches TV with Mrs. Halliday until it is time to rest. Now some of you might say, until it is time for her to rest. That's okay too. So Charles watches TV with Mrs. Halliday until it is time for her to rest, or until it is time to rest. And then number 8, Charles goes home as soon as he finishes playing a game with Mrs. Halliday. Charles goes home as soon as he finishes, or we can say as soon as he is finished playing a game with Mrs. Halliday. So we could also say Charles doesn't go home until he finishes playing a game with Mrs. Halliday. Charles doesn't go home until he finishes, or until he is finished playing a game with Mrs. Halliday. Okay, I hope that wasn't too confusing. So let's look at exercise 3, communicate. So in this exercise, think about a time when you helped someone or volunteered. And since we can't do this partner activity with other students, you can, as I mentioned earlier, you can talk to one of your family members, your children, and tell them about a time that you volunteered, or maybe you volunteered with them, so you could talk about the experience that you had together, or you could write it down, or just verbally practice it yourself. Okay, so if you look at the example conversation, it says, I volunteered at an animal shelter. So this is going to be past tense because it's about a previous experience. Okay, what did you do as soon as you arrived? I checked the board for my duties. How late did you stay? I stayed until the shelter closed for the day. So maybe many of you also volunteered at an animal shelter or a food bank, or with your children's school, or at a community event. So use the phrases as soon as and until to describe some of the things that you did. Okay, so we're going to look at our workbook on page 56, lesson B. It says future time clauses, but actually if you look at your student's book, it says time clauses. So we know that clauses using until and as soon as can be used in present, past, and future tenses. So in your workbook, it says future time clauses, but actually it should just say time clauses. Only that first activity is, only exercise 1 is future time clauses. But the other ones are actually present and past tenses. So you can disregard the main title. But number 1, underline the future time clause in each sentence. Okay, so number 1, I'll help you with your homework as soon as I finish doing mine. So in this case, the future time clause is as soon as I finish doing mine. And as I mentioned, The main clause is I'll help you with your homework. That's an independent clause. It can stand alone. But as soon as I finish doing mine is a dependent time clause. Okay, so I'll give you some time to finish numbers 2 through 5, and then we will continue. Okay, number 2. As soon as I finish cleaning the house, I'll go to the store. Okay, so as you can see, this one begins with the time clause. So the time clause is as soon as I finish cleaning the house, and the main clause is I'll go to the store. So let me make a note here. If you look at the future tense sentences, you can see that the future tense verb is in the main clause, not in the dependent time clause. So if you look carefully, the dependent time clause actually uses present tense. And if you remember, this was also the case for other time clauses like using when clauses or if clauses. So for example, if you remember, if prices go down, I will buy a ticket. So it's the same thing. The if clause is the dependent clause, and it uses present tense. The main clause includes the future tense. So if prices go down, we say go down. We don't say will go down, we say go down. So that's present tense. And then we say I will buy tickets. So the main clause, I will buy tickets, includes the future tense. So it's the same thing for these time clauses using until and as soon as. For the dependent time clause, we just use present tense, and the main clause includes the future tense. Okay, so number 3, my husband will take care of the children until I get home from work. So in this case, the time clause is until I get home from work. And as you can see, again, the time clause is just present tense, and the future tense is included in the main clause. My husband will take care of the children. Okay, number 4, I'll volunteer every day until summer vacation ends. So the time clause is until summer vacation ends. And then number 5, until my son eats his salad, all his salad, I won't give him any dessert. So in this case, the time clause is until my son eats all his salad. So if you want more practice, then you can change these sentences using until instead of as soon as, and also vice versa, you can use as soon as instead of until. Not all the sentences will be natural sounding. Some are better as they already are, but some of them, they can be done well. For example, let's look at the last one actually. Until my son eats all his salad, I won't give him any dessert. We can also say, as soon as my son eats all his salad, I will give him some dessert. So we can't say any because it's not negative anymore, it's affirmative. So we say as soon as my son eats all his salad, I will give him some dessert. Okay, or I will give my son some dessert as soon as he finishes, or as soon as he eats all his salad. Okay, so you can practice doing that with some of the other sentences, and if you have any questions, you can message me or email me. You have my email here in the video. Okay, and then let's look at exercise 2. Look at Danny's schedule. Circle the correct words. Okay, so let's look at the first example, number 1A. What is the first thing that the volunteers do? B. They check their assignments as soon as they arrive at the hospital. So you can see that in the chart. At 11 o'clock, they arrive, check their assignments, and talk to the nurses. I'll give you some time to go ahead and complete numbers 2 through 6. Okay, so number 2, what will Danny do first? She will take toys to the children until it's time for lunch. She will take toys to the children until it's time for lunch. Number 3, when will she deliver the mail? As soon as the children finish their lunch, Danny will deliver the mail. Number 4, how long will she read cards to the children? She'll read cards to the children until Victor arrives. Number 5, what will she and Victor do? They'll start a painting class as soon as Victor arrives. And number 6, what will they do with the paintings? As soon as the paintings are finished, they'll put them on the walls. As soon as the paintings are finished, they'll put them on the walls. Okay, so let's keep going. Exercise 3, page 57. Complete the sentences and use as soon as or until. Okay, so number 1, as soon as Julio heard about the volunteer program for senior citizens at the hospital, he called the coordinator. Okay, now let's look at number 2. He can start volunteering as soon as he has finished the orientation sessions. Okay, number 3, he plans to volunteer there in the afternoon until the patients have dinner. Okay, number 4, as soon as he starts volunteering there, the coordinator will give him a uniform. And number 5, he will volunteer every day until school starts. Okay. Let's look at exercise 4. Write sentences about Julio's volunteer work at the hospital. Use as soon as or until. Okay, so number 1. As soon as Julio arrived at the hospital, he put on his uniform. Or we can also put the time clause at the end. We can say, Julio put on his uniform as soon as he arrived at the hospital. But I think you can just use the order of the phrases in the pictures. Number 2, as soon as Julio got his assignment, he went to Donnie's room. And then number 3, Julio read to Donnie until it was time for the doctor to come. So as you can see, just like our exercise in the student's book, you have to add some extra words to complete the phrases. So in this case, we need to include until it was time for the doctor to come. Okay, and then number 4, Julio stopped reading as soon as the doctor came in. So also in this case, we need to include the doctor. Number 5, Julio drew pictures with Donnie until the nurse brought dinner. And then finally, number 6, Julio went home as soon as Donnie finished eating dinner. Okay, so I know this lesson was not the easiest lesson, especially since we're doing this digitally. I know there might have been a lot of questions if we were in person, but again, feel free to send me any questions you might have, or if you want to try and make some sentences on your own and you want to check with me to see if they're correct, you can send them in WhatsApp or to my email. Okay, well that is the end of lessons A and B. So I will see you next time.